Welcome back to Silicon Wafers. Ukraine didn't just answer Moscow's peace offensive with a strongly worded press release, but with fire and fury. Before dawn, video from the small town of Shatura, about 120 kilometers east of Moscow, flooded Telegram and X. A black sky, a sudden flash, and then a roaring fireball rising over the Shaturska State District power plant, one of the largest and oldest power stations feeding the Moscow region. That's from United 24 Media. So, who has no cards to play? Mr. Trump, remind me again, who has no cards? While diplomats in Geneva haggle over a 28-point so-called peace plan that asks Ukraine to amputate its territory and its future, someone in Kyiv appears to have sent a different kind of answer to Moscow. Long-range drones hitting the power that keeps Moscow's imperial core lit and warm. The question for this episode is simple. Is turning the lights off in Moscow Kyiv's answer to a surrender and capitulation ultimatum dressed as a peace plan? Before we jump into the detail, thank you to everyone who supports the channel through Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Your support, especially at this time as we run the last events of the year, is absolutely critical and is very, very much appreciated. Now let's get into the story. The Kyiv Independent's latest war update notes that Ukraine's military reportedly struck the Shatura thermal power plant in Moscow Oblast overnight on November 23rd, citing Russian telegram channels and geolocated video of a large explosion followed by a sustained fire. Ukraine has not officially commentated, and the outlet stresses it cannot immediately verify the reports. On the Russian side, Moscow Regional Governor Andrei Vorobyov has done the thing that Russian officials do when something very bad and very public happens, which is to admit just enough to sound like they're still in control. According to his statement, several unmanned aerial vehicles reached the plant despite air defense. Some were shot down, apparently, but several fell on the territory of the station. A fire broke out, he said, but was later localized as emergency services worked at the scene. Charter 97, quoting Russian outlet Astra and technical telegram channels, reported that the blaze hit at least two 210 megawatt transformer units and possibly a gas distribution node feeding a 400 megawatt German-made turbine. Russian energy bloggers estimated that the total losses of the station after the strike reach about 820 megawatts, i.e. more than half its nominal capacity. Russia's Emergency Situations Ministry later said that 3 transformers had caught fire over an area of around 65 square meters. We should, of course, take this report with a pinch of salt as it comes from Moscow authorities, and of course, Moscow almost always underreports the damage of its facilities, whether they be civilian or military. United 24, aggregating Russian and OSINT data and information, put it bluntly on X. Drones struck the Shatura power plant near Moscow, according to local reports. The regional emergency ministry said 3 transformers ignited in the attack. There is likely to be more damage than that. Meanwhile, EA Daily, a pro-Kremlin site, quietly admitted that part of the Shatura city was left without electricity and hot water after the strike, with residents reporting people under the rubble, quotes, before officials played that down. Rosaviatsia, Russia's aviation authority, temporarily suspended operations at Moscow's Zhukovsky airport due to drone activity, and Russia's defense ministry claimed to have intercepted 75 drones overnight across several regions, including just 2 over Moscow Oblast, conspicuously omitting any mention of Shatura itself. Again, this is from Charter 97. This is not Moscow in total darkness, despite memes to that effect, but it is one of the deepest and most symbolically loaded hits on Russia's power system since the full-scale invasion began. Shatura is not just another plant. For a start, Ukraine has been giving warnings over the last few months, targeting facilities in other, much smaller towns and cities, but conspicuously has not hit a major power plant in Moscow itself, only substations and minor fuel networks. They have indicated, though, that holding off from doing that is contingent on what Russia does next. It's now clear that Moscow wants to take out Ukraine's entire energy infrastructure and weaponize the very concept of peace and diplomacy. EA Daily describes Shaturskaya GRES, named after Lenin, as a thermal power plant with a capacity of 1,500 megawatts. It's one of the oldest power plants in Russia. It was one of the original Goelro projects, the Soviet electrification program that sold itself with the slogan, "Communism is Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country." Open source channels were faster and more honest than the Kremlin as usual. Ukrainian forces just hit one of Moscow's largest power stations. They Shatura TPP, says Garry Kasparov. We will come back to his quotes in just a second. Pro-Ukrainian monitors highlighted that the strikes appear to have focused on transformers and high voltage infrastructure, not the turbine hall itself. This is consistent with previous Ukrainian attacks on Russian refineries and substations aimed at disrupting power flows rather than creating a mass casualty disaster. United 24 noted that multiple drones struck the facility's high voltage transformers, causing a fire and interrupting power distribution, and that several oil-filled units were also hit. Russian telegram channels that usually cheer on strikes against Ukraine's grid were suddenly talking about problems in the Moscow region, reliance on backup boilers, and the rapid deployment of mobile power plants until the situation is fully stabilized. That's according to a summary by Charter 97 and the Moscow Times. Garry Kasparov amplified the sense of karma with his sarcastic line, "Meet the Ukrainian peace plan." Garry Kasparov. That phrase captures the mood in a lot of Ukrainian and diaspora commentary. If the White House wants to test a peace blueprint that reads like Moscow's wish list, Kyiv has its own set of proposals delivered by drone and more effective by far than any Western sanctions. Shatura isn't happening in isolation, though. It's part of an escalating unconventional air war over energy systems on both sides of the front line. A running timeline of the war notes that on 5th of November, Ukrainian drones and missiles struck the Oryol thermal power plant, an electrical substation in Vladimir, and multiple oil sites from Volgograd to occupied Crimea, knocking out power and forcing flight suspensions. Those all taken from Wikipedia. Earlier this month, other strikes hit the Chaikinye high voltage node near Donetsk, cutting power to around 500,000 people in Russian occupied territories, according to United 24's reconstruction of occupied authority reports. These strikes no doubt had a strategic purpose, but can be seen as test runs, as a kind of warning to Moscow of what might follow. At the same time, Russia has resumed a full-on terror campaign against Ukraine's own grid. G7 foreign ministers recently condemned Moscow's renewed missile and drone barrages on Ukrainian power plants as an attack on civilians and blatant violation of international humanitarian law. The Kyiv Independent has described this as a doom loop, where Russia destroys Ukraine's energy system, Kyiv patches it up, and then the missiles come again and wreak more damage. The Ukrainian drones ignited the transformers outside Moscow. It is a signal that they are targeting the aggressor's comfort zone. The Shatura raid makes 3 points really apparent all at once. One, a military point. Long-range Ukrainian drones can now reliably reach high-value infrastructure around Moscow, slipping past supposedly dense air defences. Two, they make an economic point, hitting a 1.5 gigawatt plant, especially the sanctioned GE-made 400 megawatt turbine, as United 24 highlights, exploits Russia's dependence on Western technology to repair the damage, but it can no longer rely on replacements for these units, or certainly not easily, cheaply, or quickly. That's from United 24 Media. And third, the impact is psychological for a regime that built its legitimacy on stability, on the ability to provide heat, light, pensions, etc., food in the fridge, while images of a Soviet-era power station burning near the capital are, I would argue, the very opposite of stability and control. So why is this happening now? Yes, it's because of the peace ultimatum drafted in Moscow but delivered by Washington. Yes, it's because Putin's threat to Ukraine's energy grid and because of Trump's attempt to annul Ukraine's sovereignty, agency, and dignity. But it's also happening because Trump is weak and wounded, because Putin is on the ropes and panicking, and both are desperately lashing out like the sociopathic president in Washington and the psychopathic bully in the Kremlin that they are. And they're lashing out against an adversary they perceive to be weak and easy to coerce. They are teaming up to strike Ukraine in a kind of authoritarian pincer movement, but they are both wrong. Ukraine is strong, Ukraine is resilient, Ukraine will not give in to coercion and threat. And crucially, Ukraine has the capability to strike back. I would suggest that this strike on Moscow's power infrastructure is just the start. Wait to see what happens when the Kremlin and Washington squeeze further, or at least try to. Then we may well see the lights going out all across Moscow and in the Kremlin.